Would you ever set fire to a pile of money? Probably not, but you might be metaphorically doing that by self-sabotaging your income. Today, we're talking about 5 money mistakes most beginner creators make and how to avoid them. Welcome to Small Steps, Big Moves, the podcast about the business of influence and content creation. My name is Carmen Sognonvi, and I've been creating content primarily in the luxury family travel space since 2016. Even as a small to mid-sized creator, I've been able to generate 6 figures in annual revenue from paid travel and brand deals every single year since 2018. So to me, the business side of this profession is just as much fun as the creative side.
Hi, I'm Giovanna Gatto, and I am a freelance video editor and content creator in the food and travel space. I primarily work with small businesses and other content creators, and I've been watching YouTube since before I could ride a bike. I now work professionally in this space, and I really enjoy being able to take a peek behind the scenes and see how this business truly works. The focus of this episode is to talk about money mistakes that beginner creators typically make. So, Carmen, what do you think the first money mistake that beginner creators typically make?
Not investing in the things that matter. Because, the cliche is you got to spend money to make money. And that's true to some extent, right? You don't want to go too crazy. But, even in the early phases when I was first starting making travel content, I knew that for me, it would be worthwhile to invest in hiring quality photographers. This was 2016 when I started. And so especially when I was kind of looking at like the landscape of creators doing brand deals, and this was primarily on Instagram, the bar for quality was quite low, where literally, like, let's say I did a brand deal and I would click on the hashtag to see like, oh, I'm curious to see like what other creators did this deal and what did their content look like. And I was so shocked because very often their sponsored post would literally be them walking into a Walmart, taking a product off the shelf, snapping a photo of them holding the product in their hand. And that was the only photo, like that was it. That wasn't like a carousel and that, that's the close-up product shot. No, that was it. That's the whole deal. And so when I saw that, I was like, okay, I can see that there's a real opportunity for me to at least stand apart a little bit from the competition. I may not have huge numbers when it comes to my audience, but what I can do, that's something I can't really control directly, but what I can control is the sort of aesthetic quality of my content. And so even early on, when I was making little to no money, I found ways to hire photographers to shoot with me, whether that was other, photographers who are just starting out and willing to shoot for free because they were building their portfolio like I was, to photographers who did charge, but their fees were low enough that I could handle it. That's something that I very much do not regret investing in early on because it made such a big difference.
I just think people don't realize just how important it is to hire quality help. I think it's even more important than, going out and upgrading your gear. I feel like, if you spend the time, energy, and money finding people who will support you and your business and your brand, you could just grow twice as fast, which, is the goal, is you want to grow and you want to grow your business. So I think that finding quality help, just like you mentioned, photographers, is super important.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, anytime you're investing in quality, it makes a big difference. Like even this podcast, right? Like I had been kicking around the idea of doing this podcast for the better part of a year. But one of the things that held me back is that I was looking at everyone else who had a podcast, which everyone does these days. And I was like, I don't want to shoot this in my house and I don't want to do it over Zoom because after the pandemic's like, I don't want to ever watch another video of a Zoom call like ever in my life, And so I thought like, one thing I really want to do, if I'm going to do this podcast, I want to do it really to high quality, and which is why you see what you see here. For those of you listening to the audio version, we do have a video version on YouTube, and we film it in a real studio, high-end cameras, great lighting. And to me, that made the project so much more worthwhile to do. However, it did cost me a lot of money to invest in this at a time when this project is not making any money at this time. But I know that investment is going to pay off down the line. And I think it's like that over and over again in your creator career. There's always going to be opportunities where you face a little bit of like a fork in the road, where you have to decide, am I going to kind of do it the easy way or keep doing it the same way? Or am I going to take a little bit of a financial risk and maybe invest a little more and see if I can kind of take things to the next level? And I think anytime that you take the investment fork, I've never regretted it. And that goes for travel too. If you're not in the travel content creator space, this may be news to you, but there is this very strange phenomenon where, because so many travel influencers and content creators get comped travel, so, we get hosted for hotel stays, we get flown out to destinations, that's definitely a part of the profession. But what that sometimes leads to is that there's a lot of travel creators who literally pride themselves on never spending a dime of their own money on travel. And I've actually been shamed by other creators for things like paying for my own airfare or, paying for my own massage so I could include a review of the spa at a hotel. Little things like that. That is a thing that exists in my in my corner of the internet. And what I have found is that if you have these very hard rules about what you are and aren't willing to do for a partnership, you're ultimately you're the one that's missing out. So for example, a lot of creators will say, I am not going to work with a hotel unless they can also cover airfare. And it makes sense on paper, right? Why should you have to kick in some money to essentially create marketing content for them? But what that leaves out is that it benefits you as well as a creator. It benefits your audience. If this is a hotel that works for your content, where the content is going to perform well, where your audience is going to really gain value from the content you shoot at this hotel, then the benefit is not all going just to the hotel, right? And so there's been a few instances where we were invited out by some really interesting properties. However, they didn't have the budget to cover airfare, which happens a lot. And we decided to do it anyway. And the 2 times I can think of that we've done that, one was to an amazing resort in the Maldives. Another was to a safari lodge in Kenya. Those 2 times when we paid for our own airfare to go and stay at these properties, that was some of our best performing content ever. It grew our audience tremendously. It elevated our brand. It brought so many new brand partners, audience members into our fold. And if I had this really hard and fast rule where it's I'm not going to pay my own airfare ever, I would have missed out on those opportunities. So invest in what matters, because it really does make a difference.
I think that's so important. It's definitely a part of your business to be able to invest back into it. But I do feel like I sometimes have a little bit of a pet peeve. Now, sometimes I see creators posting content where maybe they got a book or a shirt that they're just reading or wearing. And they're like, I spent my own money on this. I just want to make sure you understand that this is my money that I spent. Now, listen, that is true technically, but my pet peeve is that it's for the business. Mm-hmm. That is money spent towards your business. You're creating content for it. And I feel like it's not perfectly accurate.
Yes. No, and I feel like this is why people love to hate influencers, right? It's stuff like this. I've definitely seen, I'm very into perfume talk or perfume YouTube. And I've definitely seen a lot of videos where it's I bought every single perfume of this brand so you don't have to. And it's well, I don't know if you did that for me specifically. You did that because you knew that was a really good concept for a video, which was likely to go viral, which would earn you more AdSense revenue and bring more viewers into your fold, right? Like you said, it's a business expense. I think it's be realistic. Yes, you are spending quote unquote your own money, but it's ultimately a business expense, right? And it benefits the business, like you said. By the way, if you're interested in learning more about how to become a travel content creator like myself, be sure to sign up for my free masterclass. It's called How to Make It as a Travel Influencer Without Being Young, Hot, or Rich. You'll find this masterclass useful if you want to be a travel influencer, but you don't have the time or budget to travel frequently. You want to create travel content, but you worry that you don't have a background in photography or videography. You want to grow an audience, but you don't know how to attract the right followers and keep them engaged because you don't have much experience yet with social media. To sign up for this free masterclass, just visit travelinfluencerclass.com self-sabotaging.com.
So what's another money mistake that you often see?
I think another big mistake is not dealing or even recognizing that there's a lot of emotional and psychological baggage around money. And very often when I see content sort of discussing how to handle money or income, especially within the context of like the creator economy, a lot of people make it sound really simple, right? Like they'll be like, oh, so let's say you get a check from a brand deal. You should set aside 25 to 30% for taxes. And the rest can be divvied up between like your expenses and savings and investments and, you know, this percent here, this percent here. And it all sounds very logical and neat, but money is not logical and neat. It's very irrational. It's very messy. I think most of us kind of know what we're supposed to do with money, but a lot of us don't actually do those things. And I think that recognizing that that is a thing that exists is kind of like a first step.
So this podcast is, small steps, big moves. And it's really, about what those small steps we can take to create big moves in our careers as entrepreneurs and content creators. So for this big topic, what is a small step someone can take to tackle it?
Yeah, I think one really useful exercise is to look back at your childhood or your youth, your teenage years, and see if there are any money memories that really stand out to you. Were there any things that happened to you that relate back to money where there's still a strong like emotional resonance? Because most of the time we took away some kind of lesson from that experience and have internalized it, whether it's like conscious or subconscious. That is very often kind of the root of a lot of like whatever our money issues are. So for example, in my childhood, and by the way, we could do a whole podcast just about my mommy issues and my money trauma as from childhood. But one of the memories that really sticks out to me is when I was a kid, we very suddenly left Shanghai and moved back to Hong Kong. So this was actually in 1989 because of the Tiananmen. We suddenly had to like leave China and go back to Hong Kong. And during that process, that trip back, we obviously packed up all of our valuable things. And for some reason, my mom decided to hand me the bag that contained all of our most valuable documents, all our passports, our birth certificates, marriage certificates, all of the things that prove that we were who we said we are, right? And so, we arrived in the airport in Hong Kong. We took a cab to our hotel. And as we were coming out of the cab, me being 12 years old and pretty traumatized by everything that was happening, I left the bag in the cab. I forgot to bring it with me. And I did not stop hearing about this for literally the next decade. And, yes, obviously that was a very important item that I left behind. But on the other hand, why would you hand the most important item to your child? That's something I would never do now that I'm a parent. But the lesson that I think I took away from that, kind of on a subconscious level, is that I am not to be trusted with important things like documents, like money. And, I think that is still kind of a lesson that I'm trying to overcome. But I think that's a perfect example of a money memory that still has long-lasting impacts to this day.
Yeah, and I think, we all have different experiences, some, greater than others, but they're all going to impact us in different ways. For me personally, I started working when I was 14. It was a summer job at a swim club, and I was paid $5 an hour. Now, for that to be quote unquote legal, they forced us to take a free membership at the swim club. So, as a result, it might have given me some good work ethic. I went on to have a lot more jobs and a career and things like that. And I wanted the job when I was a kid, 14. But it really skewed my perspective of, what making money and like labor equals. It literally took me 5 hours to make $25. So I think that for a while, it was hard to kind of understand like how much was enough money. When it takes that long to make just enough to like buy a sandwich, I think as a kid, I really just felt like I didn't really understand. I didn't have good financial literacy. I know I quickly, got a different job after, a summer or two, and understood that a little bit more. But it's something that I recognize, I think a lot of people go through, is that idea of like, how much is enough? And some people will maybe hoard money, keep money for, in bank accounts and not invest it, or spend money or things like that, because they're maybe concerned if they have enough to live. And I think that's definitely something that can result from different experiences. And it's definitely something to be conscious and aware of, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking of first jobs, that's another money memory I have, which was my first ever job. It was a summer job. I think I was maybe like probably also 14, 15. And it was at my mom's friend's company. And it was just a little office job. And I remember getting my first paycheck and I was so excited and I was really like proud of myself. And I went up to my mom and I was like, hey, I'm going to buy you a present because I just got my first paycheck and I'm so grateful that you hooked me up with this job. And so, I want to buy you something to express my appreciation. And my mom looked at me and she was like, what do you mean buy me something? She was like, oh no, you're going to hand me over that entire check. And I just remember like my heart sank and I felt so disappointed and robbed, literally. And I think that was another really powerful money memory for me. And to me, the sort of lesson that I took away from that subconsciously was that it's not safe for me to have money. And unfortunately, I think as I grew into adulthood, that resulted in a lot of times me not being able to save money or not making that a priority and feeling like, well, it doesn't seem like it's safe to accumulate any kind of money because someone will just come in and take it all. And so it seems safer to just like always have just enough. And, I think, like you mentioned, sometimes when we talk about money mistakes, we kind of tend to wag our finger at the people who are overspending, right? And who are like, oh, you're spending a lot, you're not saving, so you're bad with money. But money trauma can exist across the spectrum. Like if you're someone who is really good at saving, but to the point where it's almost like hoarding money, like you mentioned, that is also a problem, especially in business, because then you're too scared to spend money, right? Like you're not willing to invest in the things that sometimes you need to in order to kind of move things forward in a business. So I think examining all of these like childhood money memories can be a little traumatic, but ultimately I think it's a really important first step to kind of understand why things are the way they are right now. A lot of times you can trace that back to something in childhood. And then, then the key is like, how do you unlearn that behavior or unlearn that lesson? But that, this may be a bit of an unconventional money tip, but I think it's really, really important.
Yeah. And I think, the real thing here is just being self-aware about your money. Like when it comes in, what's your practice like? Does a certain amount of money give you anxiety? Things like that. Because we can all improve. It's a work in progress. And I think it's a helpful exercise.
By the way, if you're finding this video valuable, please hit the like button. It really does help us reach more creators just like you. And also be sure, if you haven't already, to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our new episodes.
So what's another mistake that you often see?
So another big money mistake that I see, especially among newer creators, is not managing their cash flow effectively. So if you're new in the business, you may be really excited when you get that first brand deal and you're like, I'm rich. What you may not realize is that a lot of times when it comes to brand deals for creators, the payment terms are not very favorable to the creator. So very often you'll have, the industry standard is pretty much net 30, meaning that you don't get paid until 30 days after the whole project is done and you submit your invoice. So you may sign a deal in month 1 and maybe in your mind you're like, oh, I'm going to get paid in a few weeks. But no, especially if there's delays in the campaign, which happens a lot, you may not see that cash until months down the line. And so learning to manage that and track that is really, really critical. Otherwise, it's very easy to go broke.
Yeah. And I mean, that's definitely my advice in this, in this topic is to track everything. I'm very big on tracking my projects and my workflow and all of that. But I also think that's a great way to, never miss a payment. You'll know if someone owes you money or if you owe someone work or things like that. I personally like to use Notion for all of my tracking, but you can definitely use whatever you're comfortable with. But it's also another opportunity to invest in your business, either in a project management tool or in help, if that's something that you're not good at. Because I know email inboxes can get overwhelming, but it's definitely a big key into how to grow your business for sure.
Yeah. And, even if you want to keep it simple, I still just use a Google spreadsheet. And, I kind of use that, and it's effective if you kind of set it up the right way. But yeah, definitely, be aware of the impact that payment terms can have on your cash flow, and don't be afraid to be a little aggressive about following up on late payments, because I will tell you that not every brand, not every agency has very ethical payment practices. There is one agency I've dealt with multiple times who clearly, from what I've seen on multiple occasions, their MO is they don't even log the invoice in their system until you start complaining about not getting paid. Like literally, that's happened 3 times in a row, which is why I will not be working with them again. So, closed mouths don't get fed. So you don't want to be the closed mouth. So definitely speak up if you have, if you're dealing with late payments.
Yeah, definitely be loud, be proud, and, send that email and stand up for the money that you deserve. Other than payment terms, what is something else that you want to, be aware of?
Yeah, so another thing that you need to be aware of is that there's a lot of seasonality in this creator business, especially when it comes to doing brand deals. So most brands will spend most of their budget in Q4, so October, November, December, because they're trying to get those holiday sales. So what that means is that in Q1, sometimes the deals are going to be very sparse. And so if you are let's say you had a phenomenal Q4 and you're like, that's it, I'm quitting my job, I'm rich forever. Let me tell you, come Q1, you're going to be in for a rude surprise. So be aware that, income goes up and down, and try to prepare for that. And, in the fat months, put aside some for the lean months, because not every month is going to be, sort of the same revenue level.
So what is another mistake that you often see new creators making?
Fixed expenses. This is a mistake that I see a lot of creators make, is running up fixed expenses. And what that means is things that are recurring that are hard to stop or cancel. So things like lease payments, people who are on permanent payroll as W-2 employees. And, my background before I started creating content, I actually spent over a decade running a bricks and mortar local business with my husband, and which was a martial arts school. And in that line of business, we had no choice but to have physical space. Like, it was not an option to not have that. And so for us, being able to transition into this content business was amazing, because now suddenly this is something you can do with little to no fixed expenses. All you really need is subscription to Adobe for software or something like that. And so I think sometimes creators who haven't been in a business where they had to have fixed expenses, you're a little bit too eager to take it on, because you don't realize what a privilege it is to not have to have that. And so that's definitely, I think, a big thing that I see.
Yeah. And honestly, speaking of subscriptions, I feel like my big point is that you should just make sure you're not subscribed to too many things you can't afford. I feel like everything is a subscription these days. Yes. And it's really easy to just hit yes over and over again. All of a sudden you're like, how much am I spending a month? But that can also go for what you were saying, office spaces or, other employees or things like that. I mean, specifically office spaces, you do not need to have an office space. Especially if you're filming, at least in New York, you can use a website called Splacer. That's great for just renting spaces. WeWork is still another place you could go to meet. There's a ton of places you could go. A library, it's free. This is a good time to mention that production as a business is just driven by freelancers. People don't typically take full-time jobs in the production space. Videographers, editors, makeup artists, all those people tend to work gig to gig. So don't feel obligated to try and bring people on full-time. You can literally hire someone for 1 hour. And that's common, that's kosher in the space. So I think that's definitely good to know. And it will also help you avoid those fixed expenses.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, definitely think of it as hiring on a project basis is really important. And always look into options that allow you to go, even office space. I do have an office at a co-working space, but my lease is month to month. And so any given time I can cancel it. And so don't assume that you are always locked into some kind of long-term lease, some kind of long-term contract with anything. Always see if there's an option to go month to month project basis, because this is not the kind of business where you have to have all of these fixed expenses.
So why do you think people end up accumulating so many fixed expenses?
Yeah, I think a lot of the times it's because they get kind of trapped into thinking about things that seem to bring prestige, right? And a lot of times they may be looking at bigger creators or even at celebrities and thinking, oh, if they do things this way, then I have to emulate that. And so, if you look at a Mr. Beast who has like this huge production facility, or, you look at maybe a fashion style person who seems to have like a 24/7 glam squad, you start thinking like, oh, I guess if I want to be successful, these are the things that I have to have. Or once I get to a certain point, this is the inevitable conclusion that I need to have this. But, I encourage you and all creators to really look at different models, because you'll find that even big creators, many of them are able to run things on a very lean basis. So anytime you can stay lean, keep your fixed expenses low, it's going to make you that much more agile and able to pivot. And, we are coming out of a worldwide global pandemic, which had a massive impact, especially in my world of travel. And you never know what's that next huge global thing that's going to be around the corner. Or it might not even be a global thing. It could be something personally that happens in your life where suddenly you have to completely pivot the way you were doing things. If you're locked into all of these long-term leases, long-term employment contracts, it's going to be hard for you to kind of like be nimble and adapt. So yeah, just keep things lean, keep things flexible. So one of the big mistakes that I see is creators who say yes to every single brand deal that comes their way. And there's a few different issues with this. The first issue is that if you're saying yes to every deal, you're probably not charging your worth, right? Because it's very rare that every single company is going to be willing or able to pay your full rate. And if by chance they are all able to pay your full rate, then you're not charging enough. So either way, you're not really charging your worth.
One thing that I like to do sometimes if you're, new into the business and you're struggling to maybe get those clients or land those brand deals that you really want, sometimes I'll offer an introductory rate. Now, it is by no means a discount, but it's definitely a great way to gain that credibility and that trust. So, you can say, this is my typical rate, but since we've never worked together, I can offer you the rate that you're either requesting or at just a different rate, and then say like, this is definitely a one-time thing. And then, hopefully it'll get you a promise of work. And at the very least, it'll get you some experience and some chances to be able to work with brands.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great strategy when you're first starting out and you're really trying to just like build that portfolio.
Exactly. So what are some other reasons why maybe you shouldn't take every single deal?
Yeah, I mean, I think, one thing you really have to consider is, are you burning out your audience with endless sponsored posts? And, I think some creators are too scared of doing brand deals because they feel like, oh my God, the audience is going to call me a sellout. I actually think that audiences are very savvy nowadays. They understand how the influencer model works. They understand that, this is how you get paid. You have to make a living. And so I actually think that audiences are very understanding and willing to tolerate quite a number of sponsored posts. However, every person has their limit, right? And sometimes I'll see these creator accounts where literally like every post is a sponsored post and there's no organic content at all. And I'm looking at that and I'm like, there's no way your followers are really enjoying this. Like, yes, if you're really good at sponsored posts, you can make them feel kind of editorial, feel organic. But ultimately, like, they came to you for something, right? And it wasn't just to see ad after ad. So I think the danger of saying yes to every deal is you do run that danger of like audience burnout.
I also think that a lot of people don't think of themselves as a brand. And, when you're a brand, you're not going to want to make every single post, like you said, a sponsored post. But I also think that it can seem a little forced, if every single feed, the whole feed is all sponsored content. So it's definitely, a mindset shift, but also it can really impact your audience, like you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. If you think about it, like every brand that you agree to work with becomes kind of a little bit of a reflection on your own brand. And I think a lot of creators don't think enough long-term about what is the brand that you're trying to build. So, there's so many facets, of course, that go into this. But, one sort of general overarching thing is that if you're doing so many sponsored posts, you don't seem very selective, right? Like your audience is going to be like, oh, so she just says yes to every cash grab. And, that can kind of erode that trust. But then also I think two other brands and two other agencies looking at your account, they'll be like, oh, okay, she's just one of those creators that just takes every deal and like is willing to take whatever rate it comes at. And so that's not really the reputation that you want to build. And I can also say that in our instance, our brand Top Flight Family, we've been able to charge significantly higher fees than a lot of other creators with our similar sort of audience size. And part of the reason we're able to do that is because I'm very selective about what deals we take on. And so we maintain a deliberately very high organic to sponsored post ratio. So you're not going to go on my feed and just see like, oh, every single post is an ad. No, you're going to see some sponsored posts, and obviously, Q4, there's going to be more than other times of the year. But I'm very deliberate about making sure that we're only saying yes to the things that really feel like a good fit. And that's something that I think, most creators really need to think about.
Yeah, definitely. And it also can impact, how your audience views you as well. What do you think it looks like to, a consumer if they see all those sponsored posts? At least for me, I feel like it looks cheap. What do you think?
Yeah, it can look cheap and also just not very convincing, right? And especially if you're doing multiple deals like within one category. So, you're like, oh, well, this month you're raving about Kleenex, but last month you said Puffs was like the great tissue. So which one is it, right? So it's like, and obviously there's a lot of brands will build in exclusivity clauses to kind of prevent that kind of situation. But those audience members who really pay attention and who have been with you long enough, they're going to pick up on those things. And so that's another thing where it's like, it kind of stretches like credulity, where it's like, are you passionate about all of these brands? And then also I think another thing to be careful of is what types of brands you say yes to. There's this one creator where I knew her manager, and this creator would drive her agency crazy because she was one of those people who was like, I'm going to say yes to everything. So bring me everything, no matter how low the pay is, because I'm just going to do it because I just want it all. And so the agency would constantly be like, oh, we really advise against taking this deal or this deal. And she'd be like, no, I don't care. And one of the deals that they advised her against taking was for an adult diaper brand. And not only was she like, oh, I'm going to take it, but her plan was to make her daughter do the ad, who was like 6 or 7 years old, which didn't even make sense. But, it just kind of goes to show that the lack of being selective was on like multiple levels for this creator. And, that's not to say that like you should never do any kind of deal with like a quote unquote embarrassing brand. Like you have to think about, does it make sense given sort of the context of your content? And speaking of embarrassing brands, I have actually worked not once, but twice with Imodium, which those of you who are not US based, that is an anti-diarrhea medication. And you may be thinking like, Carmen, you do luxury family travel. Why would you align yourself with an anti-diarrhea medication? And that is because real travelers know that you do not leave without some Imodium in your suitcase. Like if you're a true traveler, like who's really been around, that this is a travel must-have. And actually, we never travel without Imodium. And so actually, when we did that brand deal, that was some of the best performing like sponsor content we've ever done, because everyone was like, oh my God, yes, like I never travel without it. This is hilarious. And like we were all kind of bonding over this very unglamorous side of travel. And so for my brand, even though I'm luxury and this is, kind of a not very premium type of brand, it still made sense because we were all united by knowing that, hey, diarrhea is one of the unglamorous things you have to think about when you travel.
And, I think what's really valuable here is that that is so authentic to what you do. You were able to really kind of be like, well, I don't just travel, it's real. We have, when you travel, you have issues that you might pack some ammonia. And so when they called, you're like, it's already in my suitcase, I'll get it out for the brand deal. But I will also say that we were talking about, that's authentic. And if you're not picking something that's authentic to you, like adult diapers, it really, your audience will pick up on that. And I actually have seen this happen a lot in the celebrity space. I feel like every once in a while you're, see an ad for a celebrity, sponsoring a drug company or a skincare brand. And lately I've seen a lot of ads with Lady Gaga for, I think it's a migraine drug. And honestly, like we were saying, it can look cheap. It looks like a money grab. But it's also, it makes you think are they using this product? Is this something that they genuinely believe in? So, when you take something authentic like Imodium, you can really see the impact that it's had, just like you saw in your numbers and your stats for that brand deal.
So just to kind of bring it back to why this is a money mistake. If you really think long-term about your career as a creator, in order to maximize your earnings long-term, you really have to be able to establish positioning in the marketplace as a premium brand, as a creator who's selective about the partnerships that you take on, because that's actually going to allow you to command higher rates. And so saying yes to every deal, it's okay in the short run. It's okay when you're just starting out, but it's not something you want to really make a habit of. So if you want to maximize those earnings long term, you have to be selective. Doing brand deals as a creator can be extremely lucrative, but it's also easy to completely blow it. And there's one absolutely critical mistake you have to avoid. So check out this video in which I tell you what it is and why getting it wrong can be so devastating. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you over there.